You've been told the Federal Reserve runs the money system. You've been told banks lend money, take deposits, and that's the heart of the economy. But what if I told you that is only the surface, a tiny slice of the machine? Beneath it lies a system so massive it moves trillions every single day, hidden from the public, with almost no oversight. It's called the shadow banking system. And it quietly controls your mortgage, your credit card, your retirement fund, and your future. This isn't taught in school. You won't hear it on CNBC. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Think of the financial system as an iceberg. Above the surface, the part you see, banks, the Fed, Wall Street. Below the surface, far larger, more dangerous, and almost invisible, the shadow banking system. And when icebergs sink ships, it's never the part you see coming. Here's the dirty secret. Shadow banking isn't really banking at all. It's a web of non-bank financial institutions, hedge funds, private equity giants, money market funds, repo lenders, structured vehicles, and off-balance sheet schemes. They don't take your deposits. They don't answer to regulators like banks do. But they lend. They borrow. They gamble with leverage. And they're bigger than the banks you think run the world. How big is the hidden machine? By some estimates, the shadow banking system is worth more than 60 trillion globally. That's larger than the entire world's GDP. In the US and GT alone, it rivals the size of the regulated banking system. Think about that. The so-called real economy runs on the surface, but the hidden system moving the strings is even bigger. So how does it work? A hedge fund borrows billions overnight in the repo market, repurchase agreements backed by collateral. A private equity firm loads a company with debt using shadow loans. A derivatives trader builds a synthetic bet worth 10 times the underlying assets. All of it happens off balance sheets, out of sight, in legal loopholes designed by Wall Street lawyers. No FDIC insurance. No Fed guarantees. No sunlight. Why don't you hear about this system? Because it's designed to be invisible. After the 2008 crash, politicians promised reform. Banks were forced to tighten up. But instead of ending risky bets, Wall Street just moved them into the shadows. The same toxic leverage that blew up in 2008 didn't disappear. It just went underground. And here's the problem. This system isn't just big. It's fragile. One crack in the shadow web, one panic in the repo market, and the whole financial iceberg can flip, taking the visible economy down with it. That's where we're heading next. Why the shadow system is the most dangerous machine you've never heard of. Here is the illusion of stability. The stock market looks calm. The banks look fine. The dollar still buys your morning coffee. But the truth is that calm is built on quicksand. The entire shadow banking system depends on confidence, the belief that everyone will keep rolling their loans every day without question. If that trust breaks even for 24 hours, the system freezes. And when the shadow system freezes, everything else does too. In September 2019, months before COVID hit, something broke. Overnight lending rates in the repo market suddenly exploded from 2% to 10%. That's the hidden plumbing of the financial world, banks and funds lending to each other overnight, and it just seized up. No one knew who to trust. No one wanted to lend. The Federal Reserve had to inject billions of dollars into the system in a matter of days to keep it alive. Most people never heard about it. But insiders knew. The shadow system almost collapsed right then. Here is why it's so fragile. The shadow banking system runs on short-term borrowing. Funds borrow billions for one night just to lend it again tomorrow. It's a financial perpetual motion machine, always moving, always rolling over. But if one link breaks, if one major player refuses to roll, the liquidity stops. It's like a giant game of musical chairs, and when the music stops, there are no seats. Every crisis in history starts with the same poison, leverage. Borrowed money, multiplied through the system until no one knows where the risk really is. The shadow system is soaked in it. For every $1 of actual capital, there can be $20, $30, or even $100 of borrowed exposure. That's not a safety net, that's a powder keg. Even the collateral they use, US Treasuries, corporate bonds, can turn toxic. In a panic, prices swing, margins spike, and the entire system faces margin calls it can't meet. That's why when COVID hit, the Federal Reserve had to step in again in March 2020, not just to save banks, but to save hedge funds and shadow lenders who were melting down behind the curtain. Here's the trick. When these crashes happen, you don't see a bailout headline. You see liquidity support, market operations, temporary facilities. It's the same money printing, just with better PR. The public thinks the Fed is saving the system. But what it's really doing is saving the shadow system, the very gamblers that created the problem. And here's what makes it worse. No one is watching the watchers. The Fed doesn't regulate the hedge funds. The SEC barely understands repo networks. And the biggest players, private credit funds, derivatives traders, offshore lenders, operate in legal gray zones. They exist in the cracks between regulations by design. When politicians talk about financial reform, this is the part they never mention. Right now, global liquidity is tightening. Interest rates are high, debt is record-breaking, and stress is building in the shadows. Every major crash starts here, in the unseen corners of finance. And when the next one hits, it won't start on Main Street or Wall Street. It'll start in the shadows, and by the time you see it, it'll already be too late. So the question becomes, if this system is so dangerous, why does it exist? Who benefits from keeping it alive? Because make no mistake, it's not you, it's not me, and it's not democracy. It's a machine built by and for the elite, and they intend to keep it hidden. Only a few companies sit at the core of the modern shadow system. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and a handful of global asset managers now control stakes in nearly every major corporation on Earth. Together, they manage over $25 trillion, more than the GDP of the United States and China combined. When the Fed buys bonds, it's these firms that execute the trades. When new ETFs launch, they supply the liquidity. They don't just own Wall Street, they are Wall Street's operating system. Then there's private equity giants like Blackstone, KKR, and Apollo. They borrow cheap money from pension funds and insurance companies, buy entire businesses, load them with debt, and harvest fees while workers carry the risk. When central banks flood markets with liquidity, these firms become pipelines, deciding which companies live and which die. It's capitalism with an off switch controlled by the few. Behind them operate trading behemoths, Citadel, Bridgewater, Renaissance, Two Sigma running high-frequency algorithms that move markets in milliseconds. They provide the liquidity that central banks and governments rely on, yet they answer to no one. One software glitch, one mispriced derivative, and trillions can vanish before regulators even log in. These titans don't just dominate companies, they own pieces of each other. When the same three firms hold majority stakes in the competitors of every industry, airlines, food, energy, it stops being competition, it becomes coordination. And when crises hit, those same players sit at the bailout table. So when you hear about free markets, remember, they're managed by a handful of institutions that operate in the shadows, amplified by leverage the public never sees. So what does this mean for you? If the system is too big to regulate and too big to fail, what happens when the next shock comes? Let's uncover how this invisible empire touches your everyday life and what you can actually do to protect yourself. You might think this system lives on Wall Street, but it's already in your pocket. Your mortgage, your auto loan, even your credit card balance are bundled and sold into shadow markets within weeks of signing. Your 401k buys the bonds they issue. Your tax dollars backstop the losses when it breaks. You don't choose to participate, you're wired into it by default. The more you borrow, the stronger the shadow system becomes. Debt isn't a side effect, it's the product. Every student loan, credit card bill, or refinance is another chip in their casino. The interest you pay is the interest they trade. That's why the machine will never stop encouraging you to spend. They don't need chains to keep you in line, they have convenience. Tap to pay. Easy credit. Buy now, pay later. Each promise of simplicity builds dependency. When money becomes digital, traceable, and programmable, control stops looking like tyranny. It looks like efficiency. When the shadow system stumbles, the fallout lands on workers, savers, retirees. Your portfolio drops 30%, your job freezes, your dollar buys less. Meanwhile, the same institutions responsible for the collapse buy the dip with bailout cash. The cycle isn't broken, it's baked in. You can't dismantle the machine alone, but you can step out of its path. First, understand it. Financial literacy is rebellion. 2. Reduce toxic debt. Every dollar you don't owe weakens their leverage. 3. Own real assets. Skills, local businesses' equity, productive tools, things no liquidity crisis can erase. 4. Use tech wisely. Crypto, peer-to-peer payments, and decentralized networks aren't silver bullets, but they restore choice, if you learn before you leap. This isn't just about money. It's about autonomy, the right to decide how your work and savings shape your life. Every empire in history has tried to centralize control of money, and every time people found a way around it. The question now is whether we'll recognize the pattern before it resets again. The shadow banking system won't appear on the ballot. It won't be debated on television. But it decides the outcome of both. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, and that's where change begins. Because the only power greater than the invisible empire is an informed public.